a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 96 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday evening with me. And if you're checking out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So lately it feels as if we've been doing an awful lot of retrospectives, talking about whether it's great actors or filmmakers who have passed. And I've always believed that this is a big part of film theory, film criticism, and just general film history, which is to appreciate those who gave a lot to the cinema who are no longer with us, especially if they were taken recently and or too young, when they were still able to continue to work if they hadn't gotten sick. And in the case of the individual that I'm going to be talking about in this episode, he's also a Long Island native. Today marks 80 years since the fantastic Oscar-winning filmmaker Jonathan Demme was born. He was born February 22nd, 1944. And he's somebody who I don't want to say that I have a problematic relationship with as far as movies, because there are some filmmakers where I would say that, where I kind of, like with David Lynch, for example, I love Blue Velvet, but most of the other David Lynch films I've seen, I don't really like. The Elephant Man, Wild at Heart didn't really do anything for me. Mulholland Drive, people go crazy over. Inland Empire, Twin Peaks, great show, but Blue Velvet is, to me, one of the greatest movies ever made. So I don't love all of David Lynch's work. I don't love most of it, but David Lynch is clearly a master. And Jonathan Demme, despite many kind of ups and downs as far as some of the movies he made, and particularly in his later film work, because this is a guy who was a music video director, and then in his later career, he did a lot of work in TV. So he was someone who clearly was not going to follow a certain pattern, now I'll just do this, and that's all I'm going to do. He had a lot of different interests, and he didn't have the career of other directors where the talent level is comparable. And this is somebody who clearly is on the level of Spielberg, Scorsese, Coppola, and guys of that echelon in terms of talent and vision. He just didn't make that many movies, you could argue, that were to the level of what he was capable of. Sometimes it's just a matter of projects not working out the way that you think they might or how you would imagine that they might. But he will always have his classics. And the first movie of his, which is almost unanimously regarded as a classic, even though it is a film that has a lot of issues and it probably couldn't be made today. They would have to change it drastically. But he did a film called Something Wild in 1986. And it showed that he was a different talent. The way that he assembles the movie, the editing, it does feel like somebody who knew his way around a music video. But he did something completely unexpected in that movie, in that it starts off as what appears to be a kind of a goofy, kooky romantic comedy, and then it goes dark. And it's a great early Ray Liotta performance, years before Goodfellas, where Liotta showed a kind of an energy on screen hasn't been seen by that many other people. Like, Ray Liotta is a distinctive performer. And oddly enough, in Goodfellas, he's often the only sane man on screen or somewhat relatable character on screen. He's not just going out and saying, we got to kill this guy, we got to kill this guy, we got to kill this guy. Liotta in Something Wild is a kind of wild card character. And the movie has a kind of weird vibe and a very uncomfortable energy to it. And I feel like that's why the reviews aren't across the board great. And back in the day, there were people, this was the kind of movie that made 10 best lists, but there were critics who were offended by it because it just doesn't do anything like what it appears to be setting up. But the movie marked Jonathan Demme as a major talent in filmmaking, not just in music videos. And there are plenty of filmmakers that have done both and that had major success in both. David Fincher, guys like that, that have been involved in both. I mean, even Spike Lee. Here's a little trivia for you. An iconic 1990s music video, 1993, Naughty by Nature, Hip Hop Hooray. The music video, which was a huge hit, was directed by Spike Lee. So even someone like that, who started like kind of ground level, street level filmmaking as Spike did, making those early movies on shoestring budgets, just going out and getting it done. Even he directed a music video. And if you watch the video, he seems like he had a really good time. The video ends with him being hoisted up in the air, almost like he's in a mosh pit. It's really fucking classic. But Something Wild, even though it was not like really a big box office hit, it showed that he was someone to watch. This guy is different. He just made this really edgy movie, which isn't really a comedy and isn't really a thriller, but somewhere in between. The movie itself is the title, Something Wild. It's a movie, if you watch now, you'll be like, wow. Even though I'm preparing you for it, you will still be like, okay, this totally didn't go the way I expected it to. Now, a movie that he made, which is very much loved by Generation X, is a film with Matthew Modine, Michelle Pfeiffer, Married to the Mob, which deals with FBI and mob boss, and it's a comedy, but it has criminal elements, and it's another movie that is distinctive and different and not at all what you expect it to be. It has this edge to it, this where you just don't know what's going to happen. It seems to be setting up a conventional scenario, but maybe it isn't. I don't know. Certainly another one worth checking out that may be below the radar for many people who are familiar, maybe not even with the name, but they know Silence of the Lambs. And, well, this is a movie he made not that long before Silence of the Lambs, 3-4 years. He was also a documentary filmmaker. And he did a movie that I saw parts of, not all the way through. And its central figure is a tragic figure by the name of Spalding Gray, who was a writer, a humorist, somebody who had worked on Broadway and off-Broadway with kind of one-man shows. And this particular movie called Swimming to Cambodia, it got a lot of play on HBO. I feel like I saw it all, but over like 4 different times that I was flipping channels and stopped on it. But in particular, this movie is just about Spalding Gray sitting there, like in front of a theater audience, and he's telling us about his adventures while shooting the movie, a multiple Oscar winner called The Killing Fields in the early to mid 1983. And you wouldn't think that a documentary, which is more or less holding a camera on one guy as he's telling you stories, doesn't really sound that cinematic. It sounds theatrical. But somehow you get the feeling that the man behind the camera is like, okay, this guy's really good. He knows what he's doing. Because the choices that he makes indicate somebody who's doing more than just setting a camera up and letting it go. So Demme, in addition to directing music videos, and if you look at his filmography, he was always active in TV. He got Silence of the Lambs, presumably because the big guys didn't want it. And as I had mentioned on a previous podcast, this was not as hot of a literary property as it should have been for this particular movie, because the first adaptation of a Lecter novel, which isn't really a Lecter novel, but Red Dragon, which was later rebooted into a movie with Edward Norton and Anthony Hopkins, which is okay, but it was expected to be a much bigger hit than it ended up being. But that movie, directed by Michael Mann, called Manhunter, didn't do that well at the box office. If it had, Silence of the Lambs would have invariably ended up in the hands of a bigger filmmaker than Jonathan Demme was at that time. It would have gone to Scorsese. It would have gone to Spielberg. It would have, Coppola would have had a crack at it if he wanted. Maybe even a Brian De Palma would have had a shot at it. But Demme, because it went through a lot of hands, the original producer, Dino De Laurentiis, punted. He said, I don't feel like losing any more money, fuck this. And then Gene Hackman was going to get involved, and that didn't work out. And it went through a number of different permutations. Demme ended up being perfect. See, his editing of music videos, you can tell he was a music video director, but only if you know. Watching that film, you don't automatically say, oh, this is a music video director. Whereas, for example, you had filmmakers in the 90s, many of whom worked with Jerry Bruckheimer, who appeared to be music video directors because of the rapid cutting. Michael Bay, most famously, made a number of very successful action films, and of course is still working to this day, with this sort of rapid fire editing style. There was another filmmaker that Bay worked with, Simon West. Everything. Don't hold the shots for more than a couple of seconds. It's like in the NBA, the Phoenix Suns a million years ago, they had a coach, Mike D'Antoni, and his offense was called 10 seconds or less. Shoot the fucking ball. Don't sit around, dribble, pass. Shoot the ball. And the music video ethic, generally speaking, is rapid cutting. So when those movies of the 90s were made with a lot of fast edits, it was supposedly signaling the beginning of the end of Hollywood as we know it. Does this sound familiar? Everything is always the end. Everything is always, I wish they would just make movies the way they used to. The evolution of music video style cutting, of filmmakers who cut their teeth in music videos, to some extent like Jonathan Demme, was supposed to be doom. In the words of Tom Cruise in the movie The Color of Money, what you got in there? Doom. Well, it didn't herald anyone's doom, because the Clint Eastwoods and the old school style filmmaker, Sidney Lumet, guys like that who were active, they didn't have to change how they held shots. They didn't have to do anything different. Nobody was forcing anyone to adopt this new rat-tat-tat-tat-tat style of editing. But Demme, see, nothing is uniform. And for example, if you watch Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, which was released the year before Silence of the Lambs, Silence should have been released in 1990. There was an issue with the distributor, Orion, and it ended up not landing until Valentine's Day, 1991. But I have seen visual essays and people explaining Martin Scorsese's editing style, but they only explain the parts that they want to show, well, Martin Scorsese favors long takes. And they show the scene in Goodfellas where the character of Henry Hill, the Ray Liotta character, in one continuous shot, it's about 3 minutes of him entering a club and getting seated. And look at Scorsese's old school editing here. Yes, look at his old school editing here. But there are moments in that film where the editing is rapid fire. He's adapting to what he's trying to do. If he's shooting a scene one way, it doesn't mean he only shoots the scene one way. You want to debate history. Otto Preminger was a filmmaker who preferred longer takes and longer shots with less cutting. More master shots, if you want to get super technical. But Demme, in Silence of the Lambs, I would argue, as much as I'm not a fan of the film per se, I know it's a great movie, but the way that he chooses to edit and the way that he chooses to frame his actors and actresses and hold shots, it shows an enormous talent and command of the medium. Not because he was a music video director. He was somebody who understood film intrinsically. He got it. And he had a great story to work with and a great screenplay by Ted Talley, adapting a very dense and difficult, great book. I know a lot of people who read it. My old man read it. He loved it. He had loved Red Dragon. Didn't love Hannibal. We saw that movie together. It was just okay. Jodie Foster dropped out because she didn't like the story. And that's to her credit, that she was not, let me put it this way. If she didn't like the story, she was not willing to just make $12 million plus a cut. She wanted to do something she believed in. And Julianne Moore came in and played Clarice in that movie, and she did a decent job. But the character of Clarice spends a lot of that movie sitting in front of a computer screen. The movie is just not that good. And it's unfortunate because Hopkins was ready to rock and roll, and Hopkins gave you what he had. And Gary Oldman was really good. And Ray Liotta. in a bit of a surprise kind of performance. It really wasn't very well publicized before the movie. Silence of the Lambs, the direction is immaculate, and Jonathan Demme in a very competitive year with movies I love like Terminator 2. Now, if you're going to ask me which movie was better directed, Silence of the Lambs or Terminator 2, I'm going to say Terminator 2. It was a more difficult production because of all the special effects, many of which were groundbreaking. Oliver Stone's JFK versus Jonathan Demme's, I don't know. The problem with JFK is that at least 25% of the movie is pure hooey and gobbledygook, as much as I love it, and cinematically it's fucking incredible. Lawrence Kasdan's Grand Canyon and Barry Levinson's Bugsy, of the movies of 1991 that would have been, some of them were in contention for the major awards like Best Director and Best Picture. Barry Levinson's direction in Bugsy is great. Again, he knows when to hold the shots, when to cut, when to use masters, and when not to. It's really brilliantly directed. And Levinson also did another of my favorite movies, The Natural with Robert Redford, also magnificently directed. And Lawrence Kasdan in Grand Canyon, that's an under-the-radar kind of a sleeper pick for what I consider to be an all-time great film. But I can't really take issue with Demme winning the Best Director, even if I'm not a huge fan of the film. I can't deny what it does. And I'm not going to try to rewrite history and pretend this is not a much beloved movie that people, not me, will watch again and again for the suspense, for the way, even when you know what's coming, that scene where it looks like Jane Gum or Buffalo Bill is going to get Clarice, it still makes you go like this. That is to the credit of not just the actors, but to the way that Jonathan Demme chose to frame those shots. Can't do it any better. Now, Demme also, while he continued to, and I'm just looking at it here, continue to work in the music video field. It's funny, before the internet was everywhere, these are things that unless you actually knew or somebody happened to say it on TV, you're not going to know it. So, like, for example, Silence of the Lambs coming out, and I know the name of the filmmaker, Jonathan Demme, and it gets all these awards, and then he signs on to do the movie Philadelphia. If somebody had said, do you know what this guy did? You said, yeah, he's a filmmaker. What do you mean do I know that this guy did? No, bro, he directed a lot of music videos. Really? I didn't know that he was a music video director at that time. But Philadelphia, although not entirely successful, it's an old school tearjerker, and it's a really good movie with great music. Bruce Springsteen's Streets of Philadelphia won the Oscar, not surprisingly because it was Bruce. Although the most memorable song from that film arguably is Neil Young's Philadelphia. And there was some controversy with that because there was an idea that Bruce won because he was Bruce. I happen to love Streets of Philadelphia, and it's one of my favorite songs by Springsteen. Now, I'm just a casual Springsteen fan. I saw him at MetLife Stadium last August. It was actually so fucking stupid. The day that I closed on this house, I was so tired. And I went with my cousin, and we met our other cousin, and we had like a family time seeing Springsteen at MetLife, and it was incredible. But Streets of Philadelphia and Neil Young's Philadelphia are both beautiful songs and suit that movie. And the trailblazing, pioneering, groundbreaking aspect of that movie is it was the first large-scale, big-budget Hollywood studio-backed feature film to in any way, or in any large way, deal with AIDS, which at that time, now more than 3 decades ago, was still a death sentence, more or less. Magic Johnson had not passed, and here Magic Johnson is still alive. But in that era, 92, 93, especially 92 when the film was mostly shot, it was still very scary times. And when somebody tested positive, as many of us knew, my dad worked with a few guys who got sick and unfortunately passed, it was thought to be a death sentence. And the sense in Hollywood as the 80s kind of petered out, there were movies like, there was an independent film starring another under-the-radar actor I always liked named Bruce Davison called Longtime Companion. That was a film that Roger Ebert and I believe Siskel, his partner, on the Siskel and Ebert show as well, talked up that there was, maybe Bruce Davison might get an Oscar nomination. So it's not that there were no movies which dealt with AIDS, but no large-scale Hollywood films, and certainly no movies with big stars. And when you watch the movie now, it's beautifully shot. The direction is right on the button. The performances from the kind of antagonistic Jason Robards and to some extent Mary Steenburgen, and the fact that Denzel Washington's character is an antagonistic towards a certain kind of people. He is a very strange version of a bigot, but he is. He does not like gay people, and he is misinformed and ignorant about HIV and how it can be transmitted. And that informs some of his behavior in the early stages of the film. It is unfortunate because I love Tom Hanks. I love Tom Hanks' performance in this movie, the way that he really stretches and gave so much of himself from the actor's perspective. You know, another movie where he lost a lot of weight because his character is dying. But from the sort of hero's journey perspective, the actor's arc, and I know Jonathan Demme was aware of this while they were making the film, because when the movie was in production and they were screening the early cuts sometime in the early part of 1993, the word was that Hanks was going to win Best Actor. Because remember, Tom Hanks at that point had mostly done comedies. A League of Their Own, although a funny film, was the first time that he had a chance to try something different, and he killed it in that movie. He could have been nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I mean, There's No Crying in Baseball rant, top 10, great movie moments, right? But word was coming out of the set. And it was Robert Altman, the late great filmmaker, Robert Altman, who said, I saw Demme's film, and God bless Tom, he is going to win Best Actor. That was the guy who said it first. The unfortunate part, historically, is that Denzel's character is more of a challenge. And arguably, Denzel's performance eclipses that of his co-star. He gives the more rounded performance because his character actually goes somewhere. He starts off here. Yeah, he's a great lawyer, and he respects the fact that Tom's character is a better lawyer, if we're being honest. And it shows the evolution of somebody who believed certain things and over the course of a 2-hour movie realizes he was wrong. And when I say that Denzel sells it perfectly, you can't do it better than he does it in this movie. It is his finest film acting. If I'm asked a question, what's Denzel? How many great performances? How many great performances by that guy? He's never not great. Even in a movie that I consider a throwaway trash, John Q. He's in it. He's there. He is present in every scene. He is never collecting a paycheck. But Denzel in Philadelphia, something extra. Every minute he makes you feel and makes you believe in his character. This guy is becoming a more well-rounded person. He really is. He's nothing at the end like he was at the beginning. He has evolved. He has had this hero's journey. And Demme behind the camera, again, giving an actor a chance to shine. Denzel arguably steals the movie from the star. Much like 53 years prior, James Stewart in The Philadelphia Story, 1940, somehow walks away with Best Actor when Cary Grant takes over that film. From about the 40-minute mark, it is Cary Grant's movie as C.K. Dexter Haven. But Philadelphia was a financial success. And even though there were some people that, of course, not everybody loved it, but there were people that felt, well, if they were going to do an AIDS film, they should have been more realistic. They don't really go into enough with Tom's character and Antonio Banderas, who plays his husband, his lover, the whole thing. But I really liked it. I saw it in theaters. I was moved to tears. Absolutely. It's a beautiful film. It's painful. It hurts. It is an old school tearjerker. But in my opinion, the tears are earned. And Jonathan Demme's direction, again, is magnificent. And then it's like you look at what he did after Philadelphia. And he worked with Bruce Springsteen. He directed Streets of Philadelphia, another piece of trivia I didn't know until recently. And, he, I guess at a certain point, didn't just want to continue in the movie business in that realm. Because he did a film with Oprah Winfrey. And this movie called Beloved, which was a big best-selling novel. I think it was Toni Morrison, but I'm not 100%. Forgive me if I got that wrong. But Beloved was a movie that Oprah Winfrey, who was a successful actress, she wasn't just a talk show host. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but Oprah in The Color Purple, I mean, she's really good. So Beloved being this huge literary property, and you have a master filmmaker in Jonathan Demme making a long epic, it seemed like there was Oscar buzz all over the place, and people who saw the movie before it was released were raving and raving and raving. This is incredible. This is as good as Silence. Demme is incredible. Oprah's going to get a Best Actress nomination. Danny Glover for supporting. The early buzz was through the roof. And the movie came out, and it got, decent reviews, but it just kind of died at the box office. It just didn't hit. And I don't know, maybe that kind of moved him away from trying, because imagine the amount of effort he put into that movie, and for it to come out and be such a disappointment. I don't care who you are. It hurts. Terrence Malick, Days of Heaven in the late 70s, there are people that will argue that from a cinematographic or cinematography perspective, that is the greatest movie in the history of cinema, Days of Heaven, Terrence Malick. There were a couple of critics that thought, this guy doesn't want to tell us his story. He just wants to show us pretty pictures. Malick supposedly was so pissed off. That's why he didn't work above the titles for 20 years, almost. He continued working and script doctoring and making money, but he didn't direct another major film till The Thin Red Line. Not everybody absorbs disappointment and failure in exactly the same fashion. And Jonathan Demme had to be really pissed off that movie that he put so much effort in, that is a good film, couldn't have been too happy about that. The movie, it was a huge budget. And also, if you have an enormous budget and a film tanks, unless you're at the Spielberg level, the Clint Eastwood level, the James Cameron now level, it's not going to be so easy to get your next big project through. Sometimes you have to get creative and, self-finance or go a different route. But I would say Beloved is a movie that is worth seeing, as much as I don't really love it. But really, the only other movie he made, theatrical film for Hollywood, was a film that he did with Anne Hathaway called Rachel Getting Married. And that also almost was the independent route. He just wasn't interested in doing that anymore. In his mind, he had moved on. And I should point out that he did two films in the early to mid 2000s, one of which made an impression and one of which didn't. And it's odd, again, why people are interested in certain projects and not others. He did two remakes, and I completely forgot about this. He did a remake of one of my favorite movies, and I know I always use the phrase one of my favorite movies. My favorite movies list is so expansive. I'm talking about like top 50 or top 100 when I say one of my favorites. I don't mean top 10. There are other people that would mean top 10, but I don't. The two movies, though, that I want to talk about in particular. In 2002, he did a movie with Mark Wahlberg and Thandie Newton and Tim Robbins called The Truth About Charlie. The Truth About Charlie is a remake of Charade, a movie that is now more than 60 years old. It is a fantastic mystery, suspense, comedy, thriller, romance, all of those things, with Cary Grant in his last leading man role of that ilk, and a radiant Audrey Hepburn, and an all-star cast behind them, including Walter Matthau and Lee Marvin and George Kennedy. Charade is a masterpiece. The Truth About Charlie, despite following the story almost beat for beat, it just doesn't work. It's just not good. And I've seen it 3 times. I keep waiting for it to pop, but it doesn't. And I don't know why it didn't, because there isn't anything in the story that is like, oh, well, that was for that particular time. No, it could have worked. It just didn't work. People at that time said, well, Wahlberg was miscast. No, he wasn't miscast. And Tim Robbins is a riot. He's the highlight of the film. Tim Robbins, was already at that point in his career where he was playing supporting roles and he was just chewing scenery left and right. He's entertaining. But I remember the movie came out and just bombed. It bombed. And that couldn't have made Demme feel like, Jesus, what the fuck? You had Beloved that bombed, and now I try to do a remake of a movie I love, meaning him, and this bombs. The last movie that I'm going to talk about of his career, it's amazing. It's 20 years old now. He did a remake of The Manchurian Candidate, which I mentioned on a podcast when I discussed John Frankenheimer, who was the director of the original Manchurian Candidate. And The Manchurian Candidate reboot was a box office hit. But the sense was, at the time, it didn't need to be remade. There are certain things that should just be left alone. And this is one that should have been left alone. It cost a lot of money. It made money. And if you go overseas, maybe it turned a profit. But more so than The Truth About Charlie and Charade, I feel like The Manchurian Candidate, as presented, was more of a product of its time. And as much as Denzel and Liev Schreiber and the main cast really give it what they got, the movie is not successful. And I feel like having as much talent as Demme, he wasn't old. He was not even 60 when he made Manchurian Candidate. He was still in his 50s when he did The Truth About Charlie, aka Charade. When you have as much success as he's had, and all of a sudden people are like dragging your work, this is not up to par, this is no good, he said, this is terrible, you want to do something else. And so he mostly went to TV after that. And I don't know for how long he was sick. He's been gone 7 years. So he was, 72, 73 when he passed. And as I've said, it's not that old. When you see the Spielbergs, who are much older than that, and Scorsese, and Francis Coppola, God bless Francis Coppola. God bless him. A movie that he's been trying to make for decades, Megalopolis, is wrapped and almost ready. And Francis Coppola is going to turn 84. Continued good health for all of those guys. And it is unfortunate that Demme, who had such extraordinary success for huge chunks of time, most of his last bunch of movies were not successful, either commercially or artistically, at least according to the critics. And that's unfortunate because, as I said, in terms of skill behind the camera, he doesn't have to take a backseat to anybody. No one. Because he had it. He had the chops. He had the ability, as they say. And Long Island native. Another thing I didn't know at the time, it wasn't reported. Massapequa kid, Baldwin, also the South Shore of Long Island. Baldwin is near Freeport. It's right by a place that used to be called Nunley's, which has been gone for 3 decades. It was like a small-scale amusement park. But Jonathan Demme will always be remembered for the groundbreaking and pioneering things that he did with Silence of the Lambs, for making Philadelphia, and for doing films like Something Wild, Married to the Mob, which never do exactly what you're expecting them to, which take risks. And he was a filmmaker who took a lot of risks. He took a lot of risks in the way he decided to do Silence of the Lambs. He could have played it safe. He didn't. And he could have played it safe with Philadelphia and just said, I think this is radioactive. I don't want any part of this. This is like box office kryptonite. It's going to end my career. No. He went for it. And he succeeded. It's just, as I say, unfortunate that the big C got him, and that he didn't have the end of career that we wish. And I talked about how Hitchcock, who really wasn't that old when he made his last movie, by the standards of today, if he had maintained his health, he could have worked for many more years, for sure. But Alfred Hitchcock's last film, Family Plot, was really not befitting of a filmmaker of his stature. Sometimes it's the way it goes. And Rachel Getting Married will always be Jonathan Demme's last film. And I know plenty of people who really like it. Didn't make that much of a splash, though. But we remember Silence. We remember Philadelphia. We remember Something Wild. We remember Married to the Mob. And some of those music videos and documentaries that he did. He was a master. And this has been episode 96 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Again, I apologize for having these kind of depressive, because somebody has passed, but I don't do that unless the person is really worth remembering. And hey, Philadelphia is a tearjerker, like I said. So get a little misty talking about somebody gone before their time who was so talented and made movies that so many people absolutely love. You know, rest in peace to Long Island native Jonathan Demme. But if you're checked out episode 96 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, comment, flip on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 97 real soon. Till then, peace.